Well, good morning and happy Thursday to you. I'm Marlon Bowling, your tour guide to the ag commodities. So glad you could join us as we talk about today's trade and we go over USDA's weekly export sales data that just came out moments ago. And here to talk about it, we have Brian Hoops on the line, and he is with Midwest Market Solutions. So, Brian, here's a look at the numbers that just came out here a little bit ago. I want to get your take on this. On the corn, we had a total this past week of sales of only 264,000 tons. That compares to the range of estimates between 300 and 650,000 tons. So that would appear to be a big disappointment, would it not?
Yeah, good morning, Marlon. I think it's a disappointment on corn. Soybeans number was probably as expected, with really the bright spot being the wheat market. Wheat sales were above expectations and the best in the last 15 weeks. So it's encouraging to see the wheat to finally see some business being done. Meanwhile, the corn market here, that export pace falls further and further behind where we need to be on a weekly basis. So we need to be doing, 37, 38 million bushels at least to reach the USDA forecast. We're about 53% behind last year's pace now. In fact, we are the third slowest pace in the last 10 years this year for our corn sales. And that's the one thing that's really holding us back. The corn market has found pretty good footing just below the $7 mark. And I think could easily get over it if we found some export business, but it's just not strong enough at this time.
So I guess the big question a lot of folks were wondering is how active was China as a buyer in the U.S. commodities last week?
Well, they were the best buyer of corn and soybeans last week, and Japan was a decent buyer of soybeans, and corn. Mexico is a good buyer of corn, but it's just not enough buying interest coming out of any of those countries really to meet strong demand trends. The soybean number, for example, is above last year's pace, but just barely. And it's probably going to start slowing, as China was a huge buyer over the next 4 to 5 weeks of soybeans last year because of drought conditions in Argentina and Brazil at this time a year ago. So if those drought conditions could develop and return, we'll see corn and soybean sales really push sharply higher. A sharply lower U.S. dollar would help us on the export front as well.
Okay, I want to look at our overnight trade then. Our quotes are provided by Bar Chart. We'll start with a look at our corn. And we finished up the Globex session 2.5 cents higher at 687.5. It was a couple of pennies off of our overnight high, actually about 1 3/4 pennies. Now the March was 2 1/4 higher in the overnight trade. Let's check out soybeans then. And we had November up 7 at 13.88 3/4. January 6.5 higher at 13.99.5. So there's that pesky $14 benchmark again. It just keeps playing hide and seek with that thing, and now it finished up overnight just barely below it a little bit. Meanwhile, on the wheat, this is the one that has been chopping around sideways in really wide ranges for several weeks. Let's take a look at Chicago December, 14 higher again overnight at 854.5. So it looks like the trading range was basically not quite 20 cents wide from the high to the low. It closed not too far from the overnight high, within about 3.5 cents, but then, everything is relative. It seems like it chops around 10 cents every half hour or so. On Kansas City wheat, we had December up 11 at 951 3/4. So a double-digit gain there. July was up 7.5. Spring wheat, we had December 8 1/4 higher at 960 1/4. What's your thought here as far as potential for this wheat market? Is it going to break out of this range anytime soon then?
Well, I'd like to think it will. We've kind of tested the bottom end of this range because of the rains that were forecasted for the plains this week. Now, some of those rains were really good and beneficial, but in western Kansas, for example, kind of a bust as far as the rain showers go, and really we're not going to prove very beneficial. And we'll see crop progress numbers coming out on Monday for the first time for the winter wheat crop, and that will give us a little bit of direction as far as how good or how bad this wheat crop is going for this fall timeframe. So better to export demand. Plus, there's a little concerns about the crop in Australia. The attaché there downgraded the crop yesterday and is well below what the USDA is currently forecasting. So we may see some of these other countries run into some problems, and that may shift demand back to the United States at a time when we're going to have a tough time growing a good crop of winter wheat because of dryness.
We wondered about that. You know, every time they have a La Nina, it seems like Australia cranks out a record crop. It's good for them, bad for us for wheat production, and bad for Argentina. But if La Nina runs out after this year, after hanging in there for 3 years, maybe the tide will turn here, and maybe they'll come up short again, like they tend to have once in a while. Let's take a break right here. Brian, we'll take a look at the beef and the pork sales exports or export sales last week and the potential for a move higher in the livestock. Can they do it? We'll talk about it next. Well, we're talking with Brian Hoops, and we were talking about the grain export sales last week. Brian, let's take a look at the livestock export sales and what kind of surprise did USDA reveal this morning? Let's take a look. Beef came in at 16,000 metric tons. That's combining this year and next. Pork, 20,300 tons. Now, just a minute here, Brian. If I remember right, wasn't it over 40,000 on the pork last week?
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's about half of what we saw a week ago in the pork. The beef sales are pretty much similar to what we've seen not only last week, but also the last 3 or 4 weeks. So they're very similar. It's the pork number that really stands out here as being a bearish surprise from the standpoint 40 million tons last week and just half of that this week. So it's a sharp drop, probably going to affect the pork market just a little bit here this morning, or at least the future should be. Cattle market's still looking for some cash cattle direction. The calls were for higher money this week. The slaughter pace has been really active, really strong, but we have not seen that translate into higher futures because we've already factored a lot of that in. We did see some trade on a dress basis and in the north at steady money, but it's very limited. We're going to see a lot more trade today and into Friday. And the trade really believes we're going to see at least another $1 higher, and that could give us another leg up in the cattle futures. But we look at the slaughter pace. For the cattle market, we're about 3,000 or 4,000 head above last week's pace, which was over 673,000 head. So there's a lot of packer demand for the cattle. It looks like they're going to need to buy cattle this week, and we're going to see higher money.
Brian, from what I could gather, the asking prices today on the cash cattle market out in the plains could run anywhere from 151, I believe, in the southern plains to, 156 in the northern plains, up in the dressed area there?
Yeah, in fact, they're trading a 151 range yesterday in the north. So that's pretty much steady with last week. But, I don't know if they'll get 156. That seems like a big jump to get that much of an increase from 150, 151. But certainly 152 or 3 is probably in the cards this week.
Well, it doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Exactly.
That's why they call it asking. All right, let's take a look at our prices yesterday when we wrapped up. Let's see where we ended the day, and that'll be the starting point for today. So on live cattle yesterday, we had December 27 higher at 153.57. February was 32 higher yesterday. Let's look at feeders. They wrapped up the session yesterday with November 90 cents higher at 178.82. And January up $1 at 181.25. Yesterday on the lean hog market, we finished up with December just a nickel higher at 88.50. February was up 32 at $91 even. We'll see what they do with these export sales numbers this morning. Well, Brian, thanks for all the help. Good to talk with you, sir. You have a good trading day. Brian Hoops of Midwest Market Solutions. Suzanne, that's a story. That's about all I can throw at you for right now, but we'll open things up at the bottom of the hour.